Most advice about avoidance focuses on when to leave, how to protect yourself, why their patterns mean they can't love you properly. But there's another story that needs telling. Sometimes the avoidant you're about to walk away from is in the middle of a profound transformation. Sometimes the patterns that look like they'll never change are actually beginning to shift in ways that signal real love and genuine growth. The problem is that these shifts are subtle. They don't look like the dramatic declarations or grand gestures you might expect from someone falling in love. They look like small, consistent changes in behavior that are easy to miss if you're not watching closely or if you're still hurting from their previous patterns. Understanding what these shifts look like is crucial because if you walk away during the transformation process, you might abandon someone who's finally becoming capable of the love you've been wanting from them all along. This isn't about convincing you to stay in a relationship that's harming you or asking you to tolerate continued poor treatment. This is about helping you recognize the difference between an avoidant who's stuck in their patterns with no awareness or motivation to change, and an avoidant who's actively working to transform them because they love you. If you see these specific shifts happening consistently over time, don't walk away. Stay present. These shifts mean the avoidant loves you enough to do the hardest work of their life, and that love deserves your patience and recognition as the transformation unfolds. They start communicating when they're overwhelmed instead of disappearing. The most significant shift you can see in an avoidant is when they begin verbalizing their need for space instead of just vanishing. Before, when they felt overwhelmed or needed distance, they'd simply withdraw without explanation. You'd be left in anxious uncertainty, not knowing if they were done or just processing. But now, something has changed. When they feel that familiar urge to run, they're catching themselves and communicating instead. They might say, "I'm feeling overwhelmed and need some time alone, but I'm not leaving," or "I need space today, but let's connect tomorrow." This shift is monumental because it shows the avoidant is developing awareness of their patterns and choosing connection over comfort. This communication shift means the avoidant is prioritizing your need for security over their need to avoid discomfort. Subscribe for insights into attachment psychology that help you recognize when real change is happening versus when you're seeing temporary performance. Speaking their needs out loud feels vulnerable for the avoidant. It requires them to acknowledge they're struggling, which conflicts with their self-sufficient identity. The fact that they're doing it anyway shows they value the relationship more than their defense mechanisms. They're learning that you can't read their mind, that disappearing creates damage, that their patterns have consequences they care about preventing. The communication shift also demonstrates trust. By telling you they need space, the avoidant is trusting that you won't use that vulnerability against them, won't make them feel guilty for having needs, won't abandon them for being honest about their limitations. This trust wasn't present before. The avoidant protected themselves through secrecy because they didn't believe you could handle their full reality. But something has shifted. They're beginning to believe that honesty strengthens connection rather than destroying it. If you see this shift, recognize it as evidence of deep internal work and growing love for you. They're initiating difficult conversations instead of avoiding them. Another crucial shift is when the avoidance starts bringing up challenging topics instead of waiting for you to initiate or avoiding them entirely. Avoidants typically handle conflict through avoidance. When something is bothering them, they withdraw. When the relationship needs discussion, they change the subject. When emotions get intense, they shut down. But if the avoidant is beginning to love you deeply and do the work to change, you'll notice them bringing up difficult subjects. They might say, "We need to talk about what happened yesterday," or "I want to discuss where this relationship is going," or "I'm bothered by something and I need to share it with you." This shift toward initiating difficult conversations shows the avoidant is choosing growth over comfort. These conversations trigger their attachment wounds. Conflict makes them want to flee, but they're staying present anyway because the relationship matters more than their immediate comfort. They're learning that avoiding problems doesn't make problems disappear, it just allows them to fester and create distance. The avoidant who initiates hard conversations is showing they want to build something real with you, something that requires working through difficulty rather than running from it. The shift also reveals vulnerability. By bringing up issues, the avoidant is exposing their needs, concerns, and feelings in ways that feel dangerous to them. They're risking your reaction, your judgment, your potential rejection. They're choosing to be seen in their discomfort rather than hiding behind their usual composure. This willingness to be vulnerable is love in action. It shows they trust you enough to show you the messy, uncertain parts of themselves. If you're seeing the avoidant initiate difficult conversations regularly, you're seeing someone who's doing profound work to overcome their patterns because they don't want to lose you. They're showing up consistently, even when it's hard. Perhaps the most telling shift is when the avoidant maintains presence and consistency even during challenging periods. Before, any stress in their life or in the relationship would trigger withdrawal. They'd disappear when things got difficult, then return when circumstances improved. But now you're noticing something fundamentally different. Even when they're stressed at work, even when the relationship feels challenging, even when their instinct is screaming at them to run and create distance, they're staying. They're showing up for plans they committed to. They're maintaining communication even when they don't feel like it. They're present even when presence is uncomfortable and everything in their nervous system is telling them to withdraw. This consistency shift is massive because it goes against every instinct the avoidant has developed since childhood. Their nervous system is wired to seek safety in distance and solitude. When stress increases, their body tells them to withdraw, to isolate, to handle everything alone. But they're overriding that deeply ingrained programming because their commitment to you and the relationship is stronger than their programming. They're learning through experience that staying present during difficulty actually creates more safety and security than running. This is a cognitive and emotional revolution for the avoidant, and it doesn't happen unless they deeply love and value you above their own comfort. The consistency also shows they're building frustration, tolerance, and distress tolerance. Avoidants typically have low tolerance for discomfort in relationships. At the first sign of tension, conflict, or emotional intensity, they're out. But developing the capacity to stay present through discomfort is how secure attachment is built. The avoidant who shows up consistently, even when it's hard, is choosing long-term relationship health over short-term comfort. They're investing in the foundation of trust rather than prioritizing their immediate ease. This investment is love. It's them saying through their actions that you're worth the discomfort, worth the work, worth staying for even when every fiber of their being wants to run. They're asking about your feelings and actually listening. A subtle but crucial shift is when the avoidant begins actively asking about your emotional experience and genuinely listening to your responses. Before, they might have changed the subject when emotions came up, or they offered solutions to fix problems rather than holding space for feelings. But now they're asking, how did that make you feel? Or, what do you need from me right now? Or, I want to understand your experience better. And when you share, they're actually listening without defensiveness or trying to immediately problem solve. This emotional curiosity shift indicates the avoidant is developing emotional intelligence and empathy. They're learning that your feelings matter, that understanding your experience is crucial to connection, that emotions aren't threats to be managed, but information to be understood. This represents a fundamental shift in how they relate to emotions in general and your emotions specifically. The avoidant who asks about your feelings and listens is showing they want to know you deeply, not just know about you. They want to understand your inner world, not just coexist in proximity. The listening shift also demonstrates they're working on their tendency to make everything about them. Avoidants often interpret others' emotions as criticism or demands. Your hurt becomes an accusation. Your needs become pressure. But when they're asking about your feelings and listening without defensiveness, they're separating your experience from their self-protection. They're creating space for your reality to exist without immediately relating it to their safety. This capacity to hold space for your emotions while managing their own reactivity is advanced relational work. If you're seeing this, you're seeing someone who loves you enough to develop capacities they've never had before. They're including you in their future plans. One of the clearest signs an avoidant loves you is when they start naturally including you in their future thinking. Avoidants typically keep their future vague or solo. They don't make plans far in advance because commitment feels claustrophobic. They talk about their goals and dreams in individual terms, not shared ones. But if you're noticing the avoidant mentioning you in their future planning, something significant has shifted. They might say, when we go on that trip next summer, or I was thinking about where we might want to live eventually, or I want you to meet my family at the holidays. This future orientation shift shows the avoidant is allowing themselves to imagine sustained connection with you. Before, imagining a long-term future together felt suffocating. They needed to keep their options open, their future unencumbered by relational commitment. But now they're choosing to bind their future to yours, at least in their imagination. This is profound for someone whose entire defensive structure is built on maintaining independence and avoiding entrapment. By including you in their future, they're telling you that being with you long-term feels more appealing than maintaining their defended solitude. The future planning also reveals they're working on their fear of commitment. Commitment isn't just scary for avoidance in the abstract. It triggers core fears about losing themselves, being controlled, or getting trapped in suffering. When an avoidant includes you in their future despite these fears, they're choosing love over fear. They're deciding that the risk of commitment is worth taking because you're worth taking it for. This is love expressed through the avoidant's willingness to move toward the very thing that terrifies them because moving away would mean losing you. They're apologizing and taking responsibility for their impact. A transformative shift occurs when the avoidant begins genuinely apologizing for their behavior and taking responsibility for how their patterns affect you. Before, they might have defended their actions, minimized your hurt, or blamed you for being too sensitive. But now you're hearing real apologies. I'm sorry I withdrew without explaining. That wasn't fair to you. I recognize my pattern of shutting down hurt you, and I'm working on it. I take responsibility for how my behavior made you feel anxious and uncertain. This accountability shift is enormous because it requires the avoidant to tolerate shame and guilt, emotions they typically avoid at all costs. Acknowledging they hurt you means confronting they're not the composed, blameless person they present as. It means admitting their patterns have consequences for people they care about. The avoidant who can apologize genuinely and take responsibility is doing intense emotional work. They're choosing integrity over self-protection. They're prioritizing your healing over their ego. This is love manifesting as the courage to be wrong, to be accountable, to be imperfect in your presence. The responsibility taking also shows the avoidant is connecting their actions to outcomes. Avoidants often compartmentalize. They withdraw and don't think about how that affects you. They're cold and don't connect that to your hurt. But when they're taking responsibility, they're making the connection between their behavior and your experience. They're developing cause and effect understanding in relationships. This understanding is what allows behavior to change, because you can't change patterns you don't see. The avoidant who takes responsibility is seeing their patterns clearly, and that seeing is the first step toward transformation. They're expressing appreciation and affection more frequently. Another subtle but meaningful shift is when the avoidant begins expressing appreciation and affection more openly and frequently. Avoidants typically keep positive emotions unexpressed because expressing them feels vulnerable. They might feel appreciation or affection, but they don't voice it. But you're noticing they're starting to say, "I appreciate you," or "Thank you for being patient with me," or "I love this about you," or simply "I love you" more regularly and with evident sincerity. This expression shift shows the avoidant is building comfort with emotional vulnerability. Every expression of appreciation or affection is a small act of courage for someone defended against intimacy. They're learning that expressing positive emotions doesn't make them weak or give you power over them. They're discovering that voicing love actually increases love rather than depleting it. The avoidant who can say, "I love you" regularly and mean it is someone who's integrating their feelings rather than dissociating from them. The appreciation and affection also create positive momentum in the relationship. Avoidants often focus on what's wrong or what they need to protect themselves from. But when they're expressing what they appreciate, they're training their brain to notice the good, to recognize what's working, to see you as a source of positive experience rather than threat. This cognitive shift from threat scanning to appreciation scanning fundamentally changes the relationship dynamic. It creates a foundation of goodwill that can sustain the relationship through difficulty. If the avoidant is expressing appreciation and affection more, they're building that foundation because they want this relationship to last. They're introducing you to important people in their life. A clear behavioral shift that signals an avoidant's love is when they begin integrating you into their social world. Avoidants typically keep relationships compartmentalized. You don't meet their friends, family, or colleagues because that would make the relationship more real and harder to escape. But if the avoidant is introducing you to people who matter to them, they're making a statement about your significance. They're telling their people, "This person is important to me," which is terrifying for someone who avoids declaring importance. This integration shift shows the avoidant is claiming the relationship publicly. Before, they kept you separate, kept the relationship ambiguous, maintained the option to minimize your significance if needed. But introducing you to their important people is a public commitment. It's harder to withdraw from a relationship everyone knows about. It's harder to minimize someone you've integrated into your social world. The avoidant knows this, and they're doing it anyway because they want you firmly in their life, not kept at the periphery. The introduction also demonstrates they're managing their fear of others' judgment or expectations. Avoidants often avoid introducing partners because it invites questions, creates expectations, makes the relationship subject to others' opinions. But they're tolerating that discomfort now because you matter more than their need to avoid social pressure. They're saying through their actions that they're proud to be with you, that they want important people to know you, that they're building something they want witnessed and supported by their community. They're seeking help or doing personal growth work. Perhaps the most direct sign an avoidant loves you is when they actively seek therapy, read about attachment, or engage in other personal growth work specifically to improve their relationship capacity. Avoidants resist examining their patterns because self-examination feels threatening to their defended identity. But if they're going to therapy, reading attachment books, listening to psychology content, or otherwise actively working on themselves, they're doing it for the relationship. They're saying through their actions, I love you enough to look at the parts of myself I've been avoiding my entire life. I love you enough to face my wounds. I love you enough to change even though change is terrifying. This growth work shift is the clearest evidence of transformation because it shows conscious intentionality and commitment. The other shifts might happen somewhat unconsciously as the avoidance nervous system begins to feel safer with you over time. But seeking help is a deliberate, conscious choice to prioritize growth over comfort, to invest time, money, and emotional energy into becoming someone capable of healthier relationship. The avoidant who goes to therapy isn't just responding to you differently in the moment or making temporary behavioral adjustments. They're working on root causes, addressing core wounds, examining the childhood experiences that created their patterns, so the changes become permanent transformation rather than temporary accommodations that will eventually collapse back into old patterns. The personal growth also shows profound humility. The avoidant is admitting they don't have all the answers, that their patterns aren't working, that they need support and guidance to change. This admission contradicts their carefully constructed self-sufficient identity. It requires them to be a student, to be vulnerable, to admit they're struggling rather than always appearing competent and in control. The fact that they're willing to be vulnerable in this way, to seek help, to do the uncomfortable work of examining their deepest wounds and defenses, is profound evidence of love. They're transforming themselves at a fundamental level because they don't want their patterns to cost them you. This is love expressed as the willingness to dismantle who you've been, to become who you need to be for the relationship to thrive.